You think you know perspective. Vanishing point, horizon line, objects shrinking as they recede. Basic stuff. Leonardo da Vinci knew this too. Every painter in Florence learned it from Leon Battista Alberti's treatise in 1436. But Leonardo looked at perspective and saw something everyone else missed. He saw that perfect mathematical lines on flat canvas could never match what human eyes actually see. He saw the pyramid of vision had a flaw. And that flaw became his obsession for 30 years. From 1472, painting the Annunciation, to 1519, when he died in France, Leonardo studied how light bends, how eyes perceive depth, how atmosphere changes color. He filled over 13,000 pages of notebooks with diagrams and mirror script observations. He dissected human eyes to understand the structure. He built camera obscura devices to test light projection. And what he discovered changed painting forever, not because he invented a new technique, because he understood that the eye is not a point. The eye is a sphere. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Codex Arundel housed in the British Library, specifically folios 170 verso through 171, recto dated between 1478 and 1518, and research published by Donato Pizzuto in Cartographica, the International Journal for Geographic Information and Geovisualization, in August 2011, which reveals Leonardo's cartographic perspective technique through analysis of the Val di Chiana map. Now back to the information. Leonardo takes the project. He sets up his perspective grid with meticulous precision, uses a millimetric ruler, pointed stylus, pins, and fine threads. The orthogonal lines converge perfectly on a single vanishing point located in the tallest mountain in the background. Textbook linear perspective. Alberti would be proud. But something's wrong. The Virgin Mary's right arm twists oddly. The lectern doesn't sit correctly in space. The stonework behind Mary shows visible distortions. Leonardo finishes the painting, delivers it, then he starts testing. Eye unmoving. The perspective holds. Perfect mathematical projection. He shifts his gaze naturally, the way humans actually see. The illusion breaks. Objects at the edges appear distorted. The flat projection doesn't account for the spherical nature of vision. This is the moment. This is when Leonardo realizes that Alberti's system is an idealization, a beautiful mathematical fiction. The human eye does not see like a geometrical point projecting onto a flat plane. The eye is curved. The retina wraps around the interior. Vision involves two eyes working together, not one. Binocular vision creates depth perception through the slight differences between what each eye sees. Leonardo writes in his notebooks, "Perspective is nothing else than the vision of a scene behind a flat and clear glass." Then he adds observations that challenge this very definition. He notes that the pyramid of vision assumes straight lines, but he doubts the lines are straight. He draws diagrams showing how light might bend, how vision might curve. Between 1480 and 1481, he's working with perspectographs, mechanical devices for drawing in perfect perspective. And simultaneously, he's documenting why they don't work the way theory says they should. 1483 to 1486. Virgin of the Rocks. Leonardo abandons strict linear perspective for something else. The background dissolves into smoky, atmospheric depth. No hard edges. No clear architectural lines converging to a point. Instead, colors fade. Details blur. Distant rocks become less saturated, shift toward blue-gray. This is atmospheric perspective, also called aerial perspective. The phenomenon where particles in the air scatter light, making distant objects appear lighter, bluer, less distinct. Pompeian frescoes from 30 BCE showed artists understood this effect, but Leonardo is the first to study it scientifically. He writes, "The air itself affects what we see." He believes water molecules in the atmosphere cause the effect. He's partially correct. The higher you go, the more particles, the bluer the air appears. He applies this understanding systematically, measures how much detail is lost at various distances, calculates color shifts, tests how much white to add to simulate haze. The Virgin of the Rocks shows mountains receding in layers, each layer progressively lighter, bluer, less defined. The effect creates convincing spatial depth without a single vanishing point line visible anywhere. To fade out like smoke. No hard lines, no visible brushstrokes. Transitions so smooth they appear dreamlike. How does he do it? He builds up countless thin layers of translucent oil paint, sometimes 10, 20, 30 layers on a single face. Each layer barely visible, each one shifting the tone incrementally. He blends with brushes, sometimes with his fingers. Antonio de Beatis visits Leonardo's studio and describes seeing the master use his hands directly on the canvas. Fingerwork allows subtle control, impossible with bristles. The result is that Leonardo eliminates the outline. In nature, he observes, there are no lines. Objects don't have borders drawn around them. They transition into their surroundings through gradual changes in light and shadow. Sfumato mimics this natural phenomenon. Look at the Mona Lisa's smile, painted between 1503 and 1506. The corners of her mouth have no defining edge. The shadow blends imperceptibly into the flesh tone. The expression becomes ambiguous because you can't pin down where smile ends and neutrality begins. This is intentional. This is Leonardo understanding that human perception is not binary. We see in gradations, not in lines. Leonardo takes on the massive mural in the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan. 29 feet wide, 15 feet tall, he uses linear perspective again, but with purpose. The vanishing point sits precisely on Christ's right eye. Every line in the architecture, the ceiling beams, the wall panels, the table edges, all converge on this single point. The composition forces the viewer's eye to Christ, but Leonardo doesn't stop there. He manipulates the perspective subtly, compresses the background space, frees it from the requirement of a fixed viewpoint. You can walk along the length of the refectory and the perspective holds from multiple positions. This shouldn't work according to Alberti's rules. Single point perspective requires a fixed viewer position. Leonardo has modified the system, made it flexible, accounts for how people actually move through space. He's applying knowledge gained from his dissection work. By this point, Leonardo has dissected over 30 human corpses. He's drawn the cranial cavities, mapped the optic nerves, understood that the eye receives an inverted image. He's the first to compare the human eye to a camera obscura. Light enters through the pupil like light through a pinhole, projects an upside-down image onto the retina like an image on the back wall of a dark chamber. He writes detailed notes on how the structure and movement of the eye affects vision. How vision is relative and variable, how pushing the eye upward with a finger causes the visual field to lower. He studies bird eyes, draws the nictitating membrane, analyzes why birds need transparent eyelids for fast flight and opaque covers to spot predators from below. All this anatomical research feeds back into his painting technique. Leonardo works as military engineer for Cesare Borgia. He's surveying territory, making maps. But these aren't ordinary maps. Leonardo creates what researcher Donato Pizzuto later identifies as cartographic perspective. Aerial views drawn as if Leonardo is flying above the landscape. Bird's eye perspective rendered with enhanced depth. The Val di Chiana map from 1502 to 1503 shows topography in 3 dimensions on a flat surface. He exaggerates vertical heights, uses color and shading to indicate elevation, draws vegetation and towns as tiny vignettes when they appear at all. The map shows the Chiana Valley between Florence and Arezzo with extraordinary precision. Rivers, roads, hills, settlements, all accurately positioned. This is not just cartography. This is Leonardo applying his perspective research to map making. He's synthesizing the vision of perspective space with the measurement of distances, creating an intermediate representation between landscape drawing from life and topographical plan. He demonstrates that the background landscape in the Mona Lisa corresponds exactly to the Val di Chiana map. The painting, he argues, contains 2 disjoint halves of one image. If you place 2 copies of the Mona Lisa side by side, the landscapes connect. The road on the left continues on the right. The water levels align. The horizon lines up. The bridge and paths form a coherent geography matching the Val di Chiana. Leonardo has encoded an actual place into the background using cartographic perspective. But there's more. Pizzuto notices the eye spacing in the Mona Lisa is narrower than typical for Leonardo's portraits. He hypothesizes Leonardo painted it using binocular perspective, accounting for how 2 eyes see slightly different views of the same scene. This is speculation, but it's grounded in Leonardo's documented studies. Between 1452 and 1519, Leonardo makes numerous drawings of projections to 1 or 2 eyes. He uses a sphere as the test object, shows how different amounts of the background are visible to 1 eye versus 2 eyes. He's investigating binocular vision, the phenomenon where each eye receives a slightly different image and the brain combines them to create depth perception. Centuries before Charles Wheatstone invents the stereoscope in 1838 and proves that binocular disparity alone creates 3-dimensional depth, Leonardo is drawing diagrams of this exact principle. He identifies 2 stimulus situations that cannot be painted faithfully on canvas. First, when 2 objects are located in the same direction with respect to the painter's head. One object occludes different parts of the background in each eye's view. Second, when parts of a surface are visible to one eye but occluded from the other eye. These monocular occlusions create depth information that flat perspective cannot capture. This phenomenon is now called Da Vinci stereopsis, named after him. He didn't solve it, he identified it, he wrote about it, he tried to work around it. In later work, around 1480 to 1481, he writes that he painted using monocular perspective early in his career. As a mature artist, he renounced this process. He wasn't satisfied with it, he condemned its use. He's searching for a way to paint that accounts for binocular vision, for how humans actually see with two eyes. No one in the Renaissance solves this problem. It's unsolvable with the tools available. But Leonardo pushes closer than anyone else. Christopher Tyler, professor at the University of London School of Health Sciences and team leader studying depth perception at San Francisco's Smith Kettlewell Eye Research Institute, publishes research in JAMA Ophthalmology on October 18, 2018. He suggests Leonardo may have had exotropia, a form of strabismus where one pupil turns outward. Tyler examines 6 artworks: Verrocchio's David and Young Warrior sculptures, where Leonardo allegedly modeled, Leonardo's self-portrait paintings, Young John the Baptist and Salvator Mundi, the Vitruvian Man drawing, and a suspected Leda. Self-portrait. Tyler measures the pupils, irises, and eyelids in each. All show an exotropic tendency with one pupil turning outward. If Leonardo's condition were intermittent, Tyler argues, he could switch between binocular vision when focused and monocular vision when relaxed. This would give him a unique ability to see scenes, both three-dimensionally and as flat images. Perfect for translating three-dimensional reality onto two-dimensional surfaces. Whether Tyler's hypothesis is correct remains debated, but it aligns with Leonardo's documented obsession with the problem of monocular versus binocular representation. 1503 to 1506, Mona Lisa. Leonardo works on this portrait for years, carries it with him when he moves to France in 1516, never delivers it to whoever commissioned it. Dies with it still in his possession in 1519. The painting embodies everything he learned about perspective. Linear perspective is present but subdued. The figure sits in a twisted pose, body angled one way, face turned slightly another. This contrapposto creates visual interest and suggests movement. The landscape behind uses atmospheric perspective. Mountains dissolve into blue-gray haze. The nearer rocks show detail and warmer tones. Distance is rendered through color and clarity gradation, not through converging lines. Sfumato blends every transition, face to shadow, smile to repose, flesh to fabric, no hard edges anywhere. The cartographic perspective embeds real geography into the background. If Pizzuto is correct, Leonardo is showing a specific place from an aerial viewpoint that no human eye at ground level could achieve. He's imagining a bird's eye view and projecting it accurately onto the background while maintaining atmospheric effects. This is synthesis. Natural perspective, artificial perspective, and composite perspective all working together. But Leonardo goes further. He studies the pyramid of vision itself. According to medieval and Renaissance theory, images reach the eye as a perfect pyramid, base on the object, vertex at the eye. Straight lines connecting every point on the object's surface to the viewing point. Leonardo questions this. In the Codex Arundel, folios 221 verso through 220 recto, dated between 1478 and 1518, he draws diagrams where the pyramid lines are not straight. He considers whether light bends, whether the visual pyramid might have curved sides. He's intuiting something about optics that won't be formalized until later developments in physics. He writes, "For Leonardo, the Alberti pyramid was only an ideal." He's identified that mathematical perspective is a model, not reality. Reality involves atmospheric diffusion, binocular disparities, spherical retinas, moving eyes, psychological interpretation. The pyramid is a useful fiction for constructing images, but it's not how we see. Medieval theory assumed the visual image compressed to a single point at the center of the eye where it connected to the optic nerve. Leonardo's dissections prove this wrong. The retina is a curved surface that receives the entire field of view simultaneously. This means the pyramid of vision terminates not at a point, but across a spherical interior. Linear perspective, which assumes a point, is fundamentally mismatched to human vision. Leonardo can't solve this mismatch, but he can work around it. He abandons strict adherence to linear perspective in favor of techniques that create convincing spatial depth through other means. Atmospheric perspective simulates what happens in nature. Sfumato eliminates the artificial boundaries that betray a painting's flatness. Compositional manipulation guides the viewer's eye without rigid geometric constraint. Albert Sauteur, modern painter and inventor of binocular perspective theory, analyzes Leonardo's work in the 21st century. He demonstrates through animated self-portraits how eye spacing affects perspective. He argues Leonardo intuitively understood binocular vision, even though he couldn't articulate a complete theory. Sauteur shows that if you compress the earlier Mona Lisa, a disputed painting some believe Leonardo created before the Louvre version, until its eye spacing matches the Louvre Mona Lisa, the compositional elements align with startling accuracy. The bases of the columns appear where they should. The visual field compresses exactly as binocular vision would predict. This suggests Leonardo deliberately manipulated eye spacing to account for the wider visual field of monocular perspective versus the narrower field of binocular perspective. If true, Leonardo is encoding visual perception research directly into his compositional choices, not just painting what he sees, painting to match how vision works. He's in Rome, working for Giuliano de' Medici. He creates a map of the Agro Pontino, the Pontine marshes near Rome. The map is intended for a land reclamation project. It shows the marshy terrain with three-dimensional relief rendered through color gradations and bird's-eye perspective. By this point, Leonardo has been refining his cartographic perspective technique for over a decade. His maps are the most detailed, hydrographically accurate representations of the time. They're also artworks. The use of chiaroscuro creates volume. The aerial viewpoint gives strategic overview impossible from ground level. Military commanders use these maps. Engineers use them. But they're also demonstrations of Leonardo's unified approach to art and science. He's not separating cartography from painting. Both are perspective problems. Both require translating three-dimensional space onto two-dimensional surface. Both benefit from understanding optics, atmosphere, geometry, and human perception. His notebooks from this late period contain extensive reflections on perspective theory. He writes, "Perspective, therefore, must be preferred to all the discourses and systems of human learning." This is remarkable. Leonardo is claiming that perspective is the fundamental discipline. More important than mathematics, more important than philosophy, because perspective is about how we interface with reality. It's about the transmission of information from object to eye to mind. Understanding perspective means understanding perception itself. And for Leonardo, understanding perception is the key to everything. To painting, yes. But also to engineering, anatomy, botany, geology, hydraulics. Every field he studies involves observing phenomena and representing them accurately. Perspective is the method, the tool, the foundation. He distinguishes between three types of perspective: natural perspective, which is how the eye actually sees; artificial perspective, which is the mathematical construction method Alberti described; composite or synthetic perspective, which combines elements of both. Leonardo works primarily in the composite mode. He uses artificial perspective to structure compositions, establishes vanishing points, horizon lines, proportional diminution with distance. Then he overlays natural perspective effects, atmospheric haze, sfumato blending, color temperature shifts, detail degradation. The synthesis creates images that feel both mathematically rigorous and visually natural. They have the structural clarity of Alberti's system and the perceptual authenticity of lived experience. Recent research by multiple scholars validates Leonardo's approach. Studies of the Annunciation published in the Journal of the Pakistan Historical Society in July to September 2023 analyze Leonardo's use of three horizon lines in a single composition. One for the sky, one for the earth, one on the rule of thirds. This was common practice during the Renaissance. Raphael, Francesco del Cosa, Botticelli all used multiple horizon lines. The technique allows different parts of the composition to have different spatial logic. The sky recedes according to its own geometry. The ground plane follows another. The middle distance follows a third. This shouldn't work. It violates single-point perspective rules. But it does work, because human vision doesn't actually experience space as a unified mathematical grid. We scan scenes, focus on different elements, construct spatial understanding piecemeal. Multiple horizon lines mimic this fragmented perceptual process better than rigid, single-point perspective. Wikipedia's entry on aerial perspective, updated May 15, 2025, notes that Leonardo was the most prominent practitioner of sfumato based on his research in optics and human vision and his experimentation with the camera. Obscura. He introduced the technique and implemented it in the Virgin of the Rocks and the Mona Lisa. His followers, the Leonardeschi, adopted sfumato heavily. Correggio, Raphael, and Giorgione also practiced it. But Leonardo is the master. His layering technique creates transitions so gradual they're almost imperceptible. Modern microscopic analysis of the Salvator Mundi, sold for $450.3 million in 2017, confirms Leonardo used lapis lazuli for the blue robe, an extremely expensive pigment, but also reveals the countless translucent layers building up the final image, each layer modifying the color beneath, creating depth through accumulated transparency. This is not intuitive. Most painters work opaquely. Lay down solid color and move on. Leonardo works transparently, builds form through patient, repetitive glazing. It's slow, the Mona Lisa took years, but the result is unique. No other technique creates the same luminous, ambiguous quality. The Codex Arundel, held by the British Library, contains Leonardo's most extensive optical studies. Folio 115 verso, dated between 1478 and 1518, shows Leonardo studying how the structure and movement of the eye affects vision, how vision is relative and variable. He demonstrates that when you push the eye upward with a finger, the rear half lowers and the imprensive, his anatomical term for the receptive part occupying the rear of the eye, sees objects as lowered. He observes that a candle flame appears oblong in reality, but the eye surrounds it with roundness because light enters through a circular opening. He's discovering that perception is constructive. The eye doesn't passively receive images. It processes, interprets, adjusts. The brain fills in gaps, corrects distortions, creates coherence from fragmentary input. This insight is far ahead of his time. Perception science won't formalize these concepts for centuries. Folio 64 verso shows Leonardo studying bird eyes, drawing the nictitating membrane, the transparent third eyelid birds use during fast flight. He describes another opaque membrane for protecting eyes, while maintaining upward vision to spot predatory birds. He's connecting anatomy to function to behavior. The bird needs to see predators from below while flying fast. Evolution solves this with specialized eye structures. Leonardo documents them, draws them, explains their purpose. This same analytical approach applies to his painting. Every technique has a reason. Atmospheric perspective exists because air particles scatter light. Sfumato works because nature has no lines. Multiple horizon lines succeed because human vision is not unified. Leonardo doesn't do things for style. He does them because his understanding of optics, anatomy, and perception tells him they're necessary for accurate representation. Folio 93 verso shows Leonardo considering how water interferes with visual perception of objects immersed in it. Water refracts light. Objects underwater appear in different positions than they actually are, distorted. This is another perspective problem, not the traditional kind involving vanishing points, but still about how spatial information is transmitted through media to the eye. Leonardo is expanding the definition of perspective. It's not just about drawing architecture. It's about understanding every factor that affects how we see. Atmosphere, water, light intensity, color temperature, movement, distance, angle, medium. All these variables modify the information that reaches the eye. True perspective accounts for all of them. He's 64 years old, still filling notebooks, still drawing, still refining his perspective theories. He brings the Mona Lisa with him, St. Anne with the Virgin and Child, St. John the Baptist. He works on these paintings intermittently. Adjusts details, adds glazes. He's never finished. The pursuit of perfect representation is endless because perception is complex and painting is always a compromise. But Leonardo has pushed the compromise further than anyone. He's recognized that mathematical perspective is insufficient, that naturalistic painting requires understanding atmosphere, light, anatomy, and the constructive nature of perception. He's developed techniques that work around the limitations of flat surfaces. Atmospheric perspective creates depth through color and clarity. Sfumatos eliminates betraying edges. Compositional flexibility allows multiple viewing positions. Cartographic perspective brings aerial viewpoints to landscape backgrounds. Claude Monet paints haystacks and cathedrals at different times of day to capture atmospheric effects on color and light. Georges Seurat develops pointillism, building form through accumulated dots of color. It's a different technique but similar principle to Leonardo's glazing, constructing the final image through accumulation rather than direct application. The symbolists embrace Sfumato's ambiguity. Odilon Redin creates dreamlike, indefinite forms that exist between representation and abstraction. Modern depth perception research validates Leonardo's intuitions. Studies of binocular vision confirm that monocular occlusions provide depth information. Work on atmospheric scattering explains why distant objects appear blue. Research on constructive perception shows the brain actively interprets visual input rather than passively recording it. Every scientific advance confirms Leonardo was right to doubt the perfect pyramid, right to question straight lines, right to study how eyes actually function rather than accepting theoretical models. In 2018, microscopic analysis proves Salvator Mundi authenticity through paint layer examination, brushstroke patterns, and pentimenti changes during painting. The techniques are unmistakably Leonardo's. The translucent glazing, the sfumato transitions, the understanding of how light passes through transparent objects like the crystal orb Christ holds. Leonardo studied optics. He knew light refracts at different angles through spheres and cylinders. The orb in Salvator Mundi shows this knowledge. Light bends correctly, reflects accurately. It's not just a painted sphere, it's an optically correct representation of how light behaves passing through crystal. But here's the reveal that reframes everything. Modern topographic analysis tools applied to Leonardo's paintings confirm Pezzuto's cartographic perspective discovery. The backgrounds aren't generic, they're specific places viewed from above. The Mona Lisa shows Val di Chiana. The Annunciation shows the Arno Valley toward Serravalle and Florence. Madonna of the Yarnwinder shows the Adda Valley toward Lake Lecco. Virgin and Child with St. Anne depicts the Sesia Valley and Monte Rosa. Leonardo is encoding real geography into every major work. He's combining portrait painting with cartography. Foreground figures exist in realistic spatial depth through linear perspective and sfumato. Background landscapes exist in geographic reality through cartographic perspective and atmospheric effects. The paintings are unified spatial representations, spanning from intimate human scale to regional geography. No one else is doing this. No one else even conceives it's possible. Leonardo achieves it because his perspective understanding transcends traditional categories. He's not just applying rules. He's synthesizing multiple spatial representation systems into single coherent images. Pen, watercolored brown ink, white lead, metal point traces on light brown paper. Created around 1481, the drawing shows an extraordinarily precise perspective grid. Leonardo drew the ground first, then a plan of the buildings, then animated the scene with human figures and animals. He used a millimetric ruler, pointed stylus, pins, and very fine threads to construct the grid. The precision is extraordinary. But the final painting, which he abandoned when he moved to Milan in 1482, differs significantly from the preparatory drawing. He changed the viewpoint, compressed the background space, moved architectural elements. The preparatory study proves Leonardo knew how to execute perfect linear perspective. The abandoned painting proves he chose not to. He deliberately deviated from mathematical accuracy in service of something else. What? Perceptual truth. The painting needed to feel right to human eyes, not just be mathematically correct. And human eyes don't see like geometric points. They see like spherical, moving binocular, interpreting organs embedded in bodies that move through space. This is Leonardo's genius. Not that he invented perspective, he didn't. Brunelleschi demonstrated linear perspective around 1420. Alberti codified it in 1436. Piero della Francesca refined it by the 1470s. Leonardo learned it like everyone else. His genius is recognizing perspective's limitations and systematically working to overcome them. He studies optics to understand light transmission. He dissects eyes to understand reception. He analyzes atmosphere to understand distortion. He investigates binocular vision to understand depth perception. He experiments with camera obscura to understand image projection. He makes maps to understand aerial viewpoints. Then he synthesizes everything into painting techniques that create more convincing spatial illusion than pure mathematical perspective ever could. Atmospheric perspective, sfumato, cartographic perspective, flexible composition. These aren't just styles, they're solutions to the fundamental problem of translating three-dimensional reality onto two-dimensional surfaces in ways that match human perceptual experience. Other Renaissance painters create beautiful work following Alberti's rules. Mantegna's Camera degli Sposi uses perfect foreshortening. Masaccio's Trinity demonstrates flawless architectural perspective. Raphael's School of Athens organizes dozens of figures in mathematically precise space. All masterpieces. But they look like paintings. You can see the construction, the vanishing points, the orthogonal lines, the geometric armature. Leonardo's mature works don't look constructed. They look perceived, like you're seeing through a window into real space. That's the difference. That's what decades of optical and perceptual research achieved. Not just better paintings. A different kind of representation. One that accounts for how vision actually works rather than how geometry says it should work. Francesco Melzi, his pupil in Air, gathers papers for a treatise on painting. The publishing doesn't happen in Melzi's lifetime. The writings are eventually bound in different forms and dispersed. Some end up in the Royal Library at Windsor. Some in the Codex Arundel at the British Library. Some in Milan's Biblioteca Ambrosiana. Some in Paris. Some in Madrid. The fragmentation means Leonardo's systematic research on perspective is never published as a complete work. Later generations encounter pieces, rediscover techniques, but don't grasp the full scope of his investigation. The sfumato technique survives because visible in the paintings. The atmospheric perspective survives because imitable. But the theoretical understanding, the critique of Alberti, the binocular vision research, The challenge to the pyramid model, most of this stays hidden in notebooks and mirror script. It doesn't influence the immediate next generation like it should have. The atmospheric depth, the sfumato transitions, the cartographic geography, the perceptual ambiguity. You can stare at it for hours and keep discovering new subtleties. The Last Supper survives, despite Leonardo's disastrous experimental technique that causes the paint to deteriorate almost immediately. Multiple restorations attempt to preserve what remains. The composition's power transcends the damaged surface. Virgin of the Rocks exists in 2 versions. Louvre and National Gallery London both show Leonardo's mature perspective synthesis. The Annunciation sits in the Uffizi, demonstrating early perspective experiments. St. Anne with Virgin and Child shows the pyramidal composition combined with landscape depth. Each painting is a laboratory, testing ground for perspective theories developed in the notebooks. 5 centuries later, computer graphics faces similar challenges. How do you render 3-dimensional scenes on 2-dimensional screens convincingly? Early computer graphics uses wireframe models and linear perspective. Looks artificial. Researchers add atmospheric perspective, depth cueing through color and clarity gradation, add texture mapping, surface detail that suggests dimension, add lighting models, Phong shading, ray tracing, global illumination. Each improvement mimics an effect Leonardo identified. Atmosphere affects appearance, surfaces have texture, light behaves according to physical laws. Modern rendering engines like Pixar's RenderMan or Unity's Universal Render Pipeline implement these principles computationally. But the principles are Leonardo's. Observation of how light, atmosphere, and perception create the appearance of depth. Digital artists learn sfumato, how to blend transitions, eliminate hard edges, create perceptual ambiguity. Game developers learn level of detail management, reduce polygon count for distant objects, lower texture resolution. Because at distance, detail isn't visible. Same principle as Leonardo's atmospheric perspective. VR headsets present slightly different images to each eye to create stereoscopic depth. Exactly what Leonardo was trying to understand with his sphere diagrams. Except now we have the technology to actually implement binocular perspective. Present correct monocular occlusions, account for interpupillary distance, calculate disparity maps. Leonardo would recognize the problem immediately. He'd understand what developers are trying to solve. He'd have insights from his 15th century research that remain relevant because the human visual system hasn't changed. We still have 2 eyes, still have spherical retinas, still construct 3-dimensional understanding from 2-dimensional retinal projections. The technology is different. The perceptual challenge is identical. The Codex Atlanticus in Milan contains 12 volumes with over 1,100 pages. The Codex Arundel has 283 pages. The Madrid codices have hundreds more. Across all these manuscripts, perspective appears constantly. Sometimes as explicit diagrams and explanations, sometimes as background to other investigations. He's drawing anatomical studies in correct foreshortening, designing machines shown in cutaway perspective, sketching landscapes with aerial viewpoints, mapping territories with cartographic precision. Everything connects to perspective because perspective is about spatial understanding, and spatial understanding is fundamental to every technical and artistic pursuit Leonardo engages with. You can't design a functioning machine without understanding 3-dimensional relationships. Can't map territory without representing topography. Can't paint convincingly without accounting for how vision works. Perspective is the common thread. The pyramid composition Leonardo uses in many paintings isn't just aesthetic, it's structural. Triangular arrangements are stable. The Virgin and Child with St. Anne shows 3 generations arranged in interlocking triangles. Mary sits on Anne's lap. Christ Child sits on Mary's lap. The composition forms a pyramid that directs the eye upward while maintaining balance. But it's not flat. The figures twist, turn, occupy different depths. The pyramid exists in 3-dimensional space, not just on the picture plane. Leonardo is using geometric composition to organize complex spatial arrangements. The pyramid guides the viewer's eye through the depth of the scene. It's both a compositional device and a perspective tool, structuring how we read the spatial relationships. The figure is shown in 2 positions superimposed, arms and legs in different configurations. This is motion perspective, showing sequential positions to indicate movement through time and space. The figure is centered in both a circle and a square. These geometric forms reference ancient proportional systems, Vitruvius's architectural theories, but they're also perspective constructions. The circle is the plan view, the square is the frontal view. Leonardo is showing how the same object appears different from different viewpoints. This is projection perspective, one object, multiple representations. The same principle he'll apply in his anatomical drawings, where organs are shown from multiple angles on a single sheet, different perspectives of the same structure allowing complete spatial understanding. His mechanical drawings push perspective further. Cutaway views show internal workings. Exploded diagrams separate components while maintaining spatial relationships. Assembly sequences indicate how parts fit together. These are all perspective innovations, not just showing objects as seen from outside, revealing internal spaces, projecting through solid matter. Leonardo is inventing technical illustration, the visual language of engineering. Every modern instruction manual, every architectural cross-section, every medical diagram showing internal anatomy descends from Leonardo's perspective experiments. He established that you can show more than surface appearance. You can reveal structure, function, assembly, motion, all through careful application of perspective principles. These aren't static objects. Water is constantly moving, changing shape, interacting with surfaces. How do you represent something that has no fixed form? Leonardo develops a vocabulary, curved lines indicating flow direction, density of lines suggesting velocity, spiral patterns showing vortex structure. He's inventing flow visualization. The same techniques scientists will use centuries later to represent electromagnetic fields, air currents, computational fluid dynamics, perspective of motion, perspective of forces, perspective of invisible phenomena made visible through representative marks. By placing the vanishing point there, he ensures the geometric structure of the perspective reinforces the psychological pull of the composition. Every orthogonal line literally points at Christ's face. The perspective is serving narrative, guiding attention, creating visual hierarchy. This is perspective as rhetoric, as communication tool, not just about creating spatial illusion, but about directing the viewer's experience of the image. Where to look first, where to look next, how to read the scene. For understanding structure without the distortion of linear perspective. Leonardo is choosing different perspective systems for different purposes. Linear for illusion, axonometric for information, atmospheric for naturalism. Cartographic for geography. He has a toolbox, applies the right tool for each problem. His flexibility separates him from peers who master one system and apply it universally. Leonardo recognizes perspective is plural. Multiple systems, multiple purposes, multiple ways of representing space. It's a portrait of a Florentine woman painted against the Tuscan countryside she would have known. The geography is symbolic, personal, specific. The choice of Val di Chiana isn't random. The region was politically significant. Leonardo made military maps of it. He understood its strategic importance. Including it in the portrait adds layers of meaning, regional identity, political context, personal connection to place, all encoded visually through cartographic perspective. The portrait operates on multiple levels simultaneously, personal, regional, technical, artistic, each supported by Leonardo's perspective mastery. A way of encoding information visually, Leonardo becomes fluent, masters the grammar, then starts inventing new words, new syntaxes, ways of saying things perspective wasn't designed to say, binocular vision, atmospheric effects, cartographic geography, motion, transparency, internal structure. His contemporaries are writing sentences. Leonardo is writing poetry, saying more, saying it better, creating images that work on levels simultaneous and subtle, that reward prolonged looking, that contain more information than seems possible on flat panels. 492 years after his death, the paintings have been looked at by millions, studied by thousands. But the cartographic perspective was invisible until someone with both art, historical knowledge, and geographic expertise examined them with fresh eyes. What else is encoded? What other layers of meaning and technique remain undiscovered? The paintings are so densely packed with information that complete understanding might be impossible. Each generation finds something new because each generation brings new questions, new tools, new frameworks for interpretation. Leonardo understood perspective better than anyone in his era, better than most people today, not because he knew more mathematics. Piero della Francesca was a better mathematician, not because he was a better draftsman. Durer's technical drawings are more precise. Leonardo understood perspective better because he questioned it, refused to accept the received wisdom, studied the underlying phenomena, optics, anatomy, atmosphere, perception, built his understanding from observation rather than theory, then developed techniques that worked with perception rather than against it, created images that feel right because they account for how we actually see, not just how geometry says we should see. That's genius, not knowing the rules, knowing when to break them and why.